Hi, good afternoon. My name is Judi Colla. I'm a 30-year resident of Hanover, vice chair for the Sierra Club Upper Valley Group, and a volunteer with the Ready for 100 campaign here in the Upper Valley. And it's my pleasure this afternoon to welcome all of you. Thank you so much for coming and for your interest and support. Also to give you a little history about the Ready for 100 campaign and then introduce our two wonderful speakers. So, history. The National Sierra Club's Ready for 100 campaign began in January of 2016, so a little over a year ago. And the purpose of it is to galvanize political will within municipalities throughout the United States for committing to 100% renewable energy. To date, 25 municipalities have committed to this goal, and we're hoping, many of us in this room are hoping, that Hanover will be the next. Thank you. And with your help, that's probably going to happen. So, Ready for 100 Upper Valley evolved from a group of citizens who were and are still concerned about a new natural gas depot and fossil fuel infrastructure proposed by Liberty Utilities for Lebanon and Hanover. These folks began to realize that the best defense against a new fossil fuel infrastructure may well be a good offense. In this case, a 100% renewable energy vision towards which we can all strive together. With help from Sustainable Hanover, who has been doing incredible work in the area of sustainability for a very long time, and with other community organizations, the Sierra Club Upper Valley Group successfully applied for funding to participate in the Ready for 100 campaign in March 2016, so just a little over a year ago. Now, for pragmatic reasons, and I guess strategic as well, our first priority has been Hanover. Over the past year, we have sought and been officially endorsed by Sustainable Hanover, a town committee, our town manager, Griffin, and the Board of Selectmen. This meeting tonight is to educate the general public about the Ready for 100 campaign, for those of you who want to learn more or who don't know yet much about it, and to generate support for our grand finale here in Hanover, which is a town vote to be held at Hanover's town meeting on May 9th, 7 p.m. at Hanover High School. All Hanover residents, we urge you to be at that meeting and to help us with that vote. And folks who aren't from Hanover are welcome to attend the meeting. You just get set up off to the side and you don't wave a card. But we'd love to have your support as well. So, if Article 23 on the warrant passes, Hanover will be the first community in New Hampshire to commit to a 100% renewable energy future. Electricity by 2030, followed by heating and transportation by 2050. So, just let's pause for a minute. Do we have members of Sustainable Hanover here, or our town manager or selectman? Because if we do, we'd like to acknowledge you and thank you for your support.
A hand go up in the back.
So, thank you anyway for the Hanover support. So while Hanover has been our first priority, we are also working with other communities, such as Lebanon, Cornish, Plainfield, and Enfield, New Hampshire, as well as Hartford, Vermont, and others, of which I'm just not aware of all of them, a lot of them, and we're hoping to be working with many more. And citizens of those towns have been doing great work in the area of sustainability for a very long time as well, and are now carving out similar paths for galvanizing political will for a 100% renewable energy future. So, for those of you from towns other than Hanover who are working in this regard, could you just raise your hands so that we can, so. So thank you for all your work, and we're hoping that you'll learn something here in Hanover, and we can help you be successful in your towns very soon for this particular campaign. So before I introduce the speakers, I think I'd like to recognize one other person in the room who, Lee Oxenham. Where's Lee? Yay. Hi, Lee. So Lee has been a New Hampshire state representative from Plainfield since 2014 and currently serves on the Science, Technology, and Energy Committee. She's been endorsed by the New Hampshire Sierra Club for her tireless support of the environment, and so we would like to thank Lee for all your work, too.
And a lifelong Sierra Club member.
So finally, it's my privilege to introduce our two speakers who've been pivotal in creating momentum towards renewables at the local level and the national levels. Our first speaker will be Julia Griffin, who has been Hanover's town manager since 1996. Previous to coming to Hanover, she held municipal positions in Concord, New Hampshire, Santa Monica, California, how'd you leave there, and the city of New York. She holds degrees in government, international relations, and management. She's been an early and enthusiastic supporter of the Ready for 100 campaign here in Hanover, and will speak about what Hanover has already done to convert to renewables and the upcoming town vote on May 9th.
Thank you, Judy. So I don't know about the rest of you, but Hanover really feels that now more than ever we're ready to tackle this issue. And some of us were talking about this earlier this afternoon. The upside of the election in November is it's certainly galvanized a lot of support for another approach to our environment. And so given the potential dwindling support at the state and national level, if it doesn't happen at the local level, it may well not happen over the next 4 years. So this is really, really important, folks. At first, we were depressed and we thought we can battle this on the political front, we can get discouraged, but quite frankly, it's the small things you do every day, the low-hanging fruit and the not-so-low-hanging fruit that you start to do at the local level that are going to make the difference. While we continue to battle on the political front, we've got to get busy. And that has been the approach that Hanover has taken for the last several years because it's practical, it's meaningful, because you can actually tick things off a to-do list. We call it our to-done list. And it makes you feel like you've accomplished something, and it's because you have. So Hanover began its process back in 2010 when we underwent some training in the natural step. In fact, I spent a week sweating in an unair-conditioned dormitory at Tufts College in Medford, Mass, getting indoctrinated in the way of the natural step. And it was an amazing program, but what was even more fundamentally life-changing for me is that there were about 20 of us in the class, and one of my classmates was a young Inuit Native American from Alaska whose village of Shishmaref was being moved inland 20 miles because of rising seas and the loss of sea ice. And that was 8 years ago. And to have him talk about what was actually happening on the ground in northern Alaska to a Native American village was far more compelling to me than any book learning I could have done in that week. And it enabled me to come back feeling that I needed to do what I could with our Sustainable Hanover colleagues to make some progress in Hanover. We've been chipping away at our to-done list since 2010. We did become an EPA green power community in 2014, the first in northern New England. Great program, set some goals that you reach for. Sadly, that program is zeroed out in the Trump proposed budget for the EPA. We've relied heavily on that program for technical assistance. And when we started, we set a goal of having 10% of our electricity consumed by all of Hanover generated from renewable sources of energy. We're now at 23%. So, and quite frankly, I don't think we would have tackled that issue in the way we did, as quickly as we did, had we not had the benefit of the EPA Green Power Community Program behind us. So it's a crying shame that that program is zeroed out of the proposed budget, but not at all surprising. We also launched the ENH, the Green Power Challenge, for electricity consumers in the region 2 years ago, and we had 376 customers join us in that purchase of renewably generated electricity through ENH Power. Blew us away. We had no idea that there would be that many folks interested. 54 homes in Hanover solarized as a result of a fabulous program run by Sarah and her crew at Vital Communities that was really critical. And now, so when Judi and the members of the Sierra Club of the Upper Valley approached us to ask about becoming a Ready for 100 community, I think we all agreed it was a no-brainer. And so what's our strategy? What's our plan? I felt from the beginning with our staff that we can't compel others to take this on unless the town itself is willing to walk the talk. And so your municipal entity here is spending a lot of time, money, and resources to retrofit our properties over time so that they'll meet that 2030 target for 100% reliance on renewably generated electricity. Sustainable Hanover is also working hard on all sorts of ways to educate our citizens about what's happening and what you can do as individual homeowners or business owners to work on this issue. And so I'd urge you to keep an eye on the programs that they work hard to produce. Great resource information available in those programs. We have a program coming up in 2 weeks that will focus on solar. And now's the time to get going with solar before some of those tax credits might potentially start disappearing. We're also always looking for partners in our work. And the nice thing about this process is that so often we work with our neighboring communities in fits and starts, but this is the kind of issue that's really brought communities together across town boundaries. And so I think, as I've said before, the only way we're going to make progress is if we work together and we work locally. And locally doesn't mean just within the confines of Hanover, New Hampshire. It's a regional approach, both on the New Hampshire side and on the Vermont side. And then we're all about creating opportunities, incentives, gimmicks, contests, you name it. Anything we can do to get people's attention and get them thinking about what they can do with their own property or in their own lifestyles. You'll see us do it over the next few years, so don't laugh at us when you see us do something cute. It works. I'll never forget what Norwich was doing with its home energy audits, where they had those pieces of fabric tied around the utility pole out in front of Dan and Witt's. Each piece of bandana or whatever denoted another house that had the energy audit done. That was brilliant, because you could see the progress that the community was making in terms of getting people thinking about this. So what have we done so far as a community? We've done a lot on the building maintenance front. And it comes from the Board of Selectmen deciding multiple years ago, with support from town staff, that we budget a minimum of $50,000 a year to spend solely on energy efficiency improvements for our town facilities. That meant raising the tax rate by 0.5% to fund that. And we sold that at town meeting to our residents. And we've resisted the urge, in spite of needs to cut back on expenditures, we've resisted the urge to chip away at that funding and reduce it. So we've spent $50,000 a year since 2010 investing in our buildings. That's an ultra-low temperature heat pump right there behind all you folks. Some of you may be feeling a little too cold right now. Rob Hausman's got the control, but that heat pump and one downstairs are now heating and cooling the two main public areas of this building, and we're looking to install more. We continue to focus on ways to retrofit our buildings, and we have a number of fairly old buildings plus some new ones. And just to give you an example, we've done building audits on every single building the town owns. We're about to do our second round of building audits because, quite frankly, technology changes. And just about the time you think you've got your to-done list done, in terms of the building audit recommendations, new technology is available that enables you to recognize there are more things you can do to make your buildings more efficient. You'll see a lot of programmable thermostats. These are second and third generation programmable thermostats in every single room in town offices. People complain when they can't raise or lower the temperature, but we set them on a cycle and they have to stay there. You have to live with a sweater on in the wintertime in our buildings. We've done a lot of window replacement, re-insulation, new roofs with insulation, ultra dense insulation between the roof and the top floor of the building, new doors, new siding and insulation. If you saw the fire department, you'll see it this summer. The fire department will all be torn up on the front of the building because we're completely replacing the insulation and siding on that building. And in addition, we've replaced a lot of our furnaces. We had a number of very old, energy inefficient furnaces that we're gradually replacing with a combination of some gas, some oil. But in addition, we're getting a price from two firms that are looking at putting heat pumps in every single one of our buildings. And gradually, therefore, significantly reducing our dependence on fossil fuel generated heat for our buildings. And I'm a huge believer in heat pumps. Just ask me about my own heat pumps in my own home and I will wax poetic on them because I think they are the way to go in the future. We have one of the things we did at our wastewater treatment plant, it was a $500,000 project when we did our most recent upgrade, but we upgraded our methane recirculation system at the wastewater plant. So all the methane produced by the treatment process is used to heat the treatment process. So it is completely recirculated. And before, we were off-gassing all of that methane to the environment. And when you looked at our carbon footprint, that was a huge contributor to the town's carbon footprint in the town of Hanover. Again, a $500,000 investment. We had to bond that. We had to get town meeting to approve that, but they did. We've got idle right technology on all of our town vehicles at this point, including our dump trucks. So those engines will only remain running for a couple of minutes before they turn off automatically when the vehicle's not in gear. So when you see our DPW guys parked outside the Aetna store to get coffee, it used to be those trucks would be running for 10 minutes while they're in chatting. Now they turn off after 2, whether they like it or not. We compost our wastewater sludge. That used to go to New England Organics in Unity, Maine, which is a 5.5-hour heavy tractor trailer truck ride to be compost and then sold as the Dartmouth blend. Particularly popular on golf courses, believe it or not. But we discovered simply by working with Mark Morgan at the Lebanon landfill that in fact they were buying topsoil, which is used as daily cover for the landfill. Why not take our wastewater sludge 3 miles down the road? It's composted at the landfill, and they use it as daily cover once it's composted to save the cost of buying topsoil. And we've just eliminated that long truck haul every week of 14 tons of wastewater sludge to Unity, Maine. So all our traffic signals now are LED. We're gradually putting solar panels on each of those signals so that we can generate as much electricity as possible to operate those signals. Our new pedestrian crosswalk lights are all solar. They're operated by solar panels. All our parking pay stations in our really popular downtown parking meter program are run by solar panels. We now have 2 electric charging stations in the parking garage, which are used heavily by individuals who want to plug in their electric vehicles. We did a lot of work with Liberty, which has been very helpful on replacing all of our lighting in town buildings. And believe it or not, we're just about to start with the second round because the technology keeps improving. And there are better fixtures and much lower electricity consuming fixtures that are becoming increasingly available. We've replaced almost all of the lights in the parking garage with LEDs. That saved us $75,000 a year in electricity costs, just by putting in LED parking garage lights. So that's a little list of some of the things that we've worked on over the last 7 years. And it's chipping away with a committed group of downtown employees who are always focused on all those little and not so little things we could do. And it takes support from the community to spend some money, because you've got to spend some money to save some money. One of the things we did was, on the recommendation of a series of consultants, we are now the only municipal member, wholesale member of the New England electricity buying grid. We buy our electricity on the wholesale market. We save money by doing that. And we also buy our renewable energy certificates through that pool, the New England Power Pool, at a savings to the town. It allows us to buy more renewable energy certificates. We're now talking with Cliff Below and folks from the city of Lebanon on aggregating electricity consumption in this region as a means of looking to purchase energy off-cycle. So electricity is generated 24/7. It's much cheaper to buy it at 2 a.m. than it is at 3 p.m. And yet we pay 3 p.m. prices for electricity. We'd like to be able to buy it off-cycle, store it, essentially, and use the savings in our electricity purchase through that approach to spend more money on our sustainability initiatives. And so this just gives you a small example of the sorts of things that are possible. What's next for the town? Solar panels on every single roof we own. Solar panels will be going up on this roof this summer. They went up on the police department roof last summer. We've got a proposal to do solar panels on our new salt shed at the DPW facility. We're talking with Dartmouth about a very large solar farm up next to our water filtration facility off Grass Road. As I said, heat pumps in every building. We're in regular conversations with Dartmouth about opportunities to partner with them. One of the projects they're looking at is a hot water heating district for downtown Hanover and the campus, as opposed to a steam heating approach to heating their campus, and looking at solar and biomass rather than natural gas. Right now they burn number 6 fuel, which is pretty yucky stuff. And we're beginning conversations with the school district about what we can do to get them to move along on some of these things. And the final question is, how the heck do you pay for all this? Well, as I said, $50,000 a year in our operating budget is dedicated to this purpose. But also, we have the support of the select board to the extent we save money on our electricity purchases each year below what has been budgeted for expenditure in the town. We can pour all that savings back into projects that we generate as staff. So direct savings in electricity consumption leads to the ability to implement more projects. I think that's critical, and that's part of the reason we're so interested in electricity aggregation. And then, quite frankly, I think we're looking at a major bond in our future for solar facility improvements. And really the way to do solar is to do it buying it in bulk, buying panels in bulk and doing large projects, even though they may be distributed across 10 municipal roofs, rather than doing one project at a time. Think of Solarize writ large as a huge municipal project, but I think you can plan on seeing a major bond issue on the warrant at town meeting in the next year or two for a significant solar investment, because we're so committed to that approach. In terms of from the bottom line perspective, as I said at the beginning of my conversation, I think the time is now. Now more than ever, we need to get moving. Not just because we saw an 81-degree day yesterday and 10 degrees 10 days ago. And if that's not an example of climate change occurring, I don't know what is. We see the patterns in our local environment. We worry about those patterns. But I also think that given what happened in November, if we don't act locally, it's not going to happen at all. And so it's really critical that we do that. We look to partner with anybody and everybody. We look to get ourselves to as many conferences and workshops and on webinars and conference calls as we can, because there's huge opportunity to learn here. And we're ready for 100 action come May 9th if town meeting approves this, because we want to get going on this project. So that's it for now.
So, thank you, Julia.
My pleasure.
Inspiring. So our keynote speaker is Michael Brune, who has come all the way from the Bay Area. Michael has been the Sierra Club's executive director since 2010, and under his leadership, the Sierra Club has grown to more than 2.7 million supporters and is still growing, and is at the forefront of the drive to move beyond fossil fuels to 100% clean, renewable energy. Before joining the Sierra Club, Michael served as executive director of the Rainforest Action Network. He holds degrees in economics and finance and is the author of Coming Clean, Breaking America's Addiction to Oil and Coal. Michael is a nationally recognized writer, speaker, and commentator on energy and environmental issues. And tonight, I think he's going to give us an overview of the Ready for 100 campaign nationally and explain the importance of our vote on May 9th.
All right. Thank you, Judy.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Julia. So the weird thing about these kind of conversations is that Judy, Julia, and myself, we are up here talking to all of you, and you hear a little bit of a introduction of ourselves, but it's, at least for someone who's out of town, it's hard to get a sense of who you all are. So I have a few questions for all of you, if you guys don't mind answering. Consider this your introduction. So how many folks here consider themselves activists or advocates or actively engaged in trying to make the world a better place? Raise your hand. All right, very good. Excellent. How many folks here do you take action as, obviously as citizens in terms of showing up at hearings and learning about the issues that we're facing, but also take action as consumers, what you buy, what you eat, the kind of car that you drive, whether you drive a car, as investors? How many folks take action in those ways? All right, here we go. How many people raise their hands by holding up a placard? That's a special extra credit. That's good. It's good back there. That was impressive. There we go. How many folks here have experienced unusual, perhaps unexpected, unprecedented levels of anger? All right. How many folks here vote regularly? Yes. Yeah. All right. How many folks here believe that the Dartmouth blend should have commanded a premium on the open market? Just kind of want to get a sense of your own self-awareness. All right.
Green after all.
Okay. And finally, how many people here, when you read a story in the paper, you see something on your screen about climate change, more often than not, how many people here feel excited and encouraged about the progress that we've been making around the world? All right, that's what I want to talk about, actually, is how we can look at this generational, societal challenge that we have with a lot less anguish and a lot more anticipation, with a lot less dread and a whole lot more excitement about what we can accomplish together. So a little bit about myself. I grew up in New Jersey, in the great state of New Jersey, on the Jersey Shore.
Which exit?
Which exit? That's a joke. So I grew up on a barrier island in New Jersey. My dad was a construction worker, my mom's public school teacher, and I grew up about a half mile from the ocean, but right on Barnegat Bay in central New Jersey, 82. And when I was growing up, New Jersey had these horrific water pollution challenges. And in my town, there were two main problems. One was that all of the hospitals in New Jersey, New York, Connecticut were allowed to dump all of their medical wastes straight into the ocean. As long as it was 300 or so yards offshore, you could just dump whatever you wanted to off the coast of New Jersey, not New York or Connecticut or other coastal states, but in New Jersey. And so if you've been near an ocean, you notice that the waves tend to go towards the shore. And so, folks who were around at that time, you may recall reading about hypodermic needles washing up on shore and all sorts of really nasty stuff. This was compounded by the fact that in the town near where I grew up in called Toms River, New Jersey, subject of a Pulitzer Prize-winning book, this was a town that was home to a large chemical company that was bought out by a Swiss multinational firm. And they had the only permit in the state of New Jersey, which has not generally been known for its far-reaching environmental policies. But this chemical company had the only permit to take its untreated raw chemical waste and dump it straight into the ocean through a pipeline that went underneath the most populated part of town, leaked, and has caused cancer clusters throughout the town of Toms River. So growing up, particularly when I was 8, 9, 10, and then 11, 12 years old, like formative years when I became a little bit more aware of the environment that I was growing up into and the linkages between being able to go to the beach and my dad's business, the beaches in New Jersey began to be closed a little bit more frequently. Sometimes they'd be closed for an afternoon, then sometimes for a whole weekend. After a couple of years, sometimes they'd be closed for an entire week at a time, right in the heart of the summer tourist season. And I saw, personally, I saw how I wasn't able to go into the ocean. So when you're a young kid, and that's the best time of the year, caused a bit of an impact. But on my family, my dad's business really suffered for many years because it's hard to have a thriving construction business when people are leaving town versus coming to town. And then when I was around 13, 14 years old, a bunch of different environmental groups began to get more active and a little bit more forceful and a little bit more vocal. And I remember one Saturday morning, my cousin coming into my house and knocking on the door and saying there was a huge rally on the beach and that Greenpeace had just come in and they plugged the pipe. They literally stopped the pipe that the chemical company was using to dump its sludge offshore, and then called the chemical company and said, you got an hour or else it's going to come straight up into your own factory to shut things down. And that blew my mind that somebody would do that. I began to look into scuba diving to figure out how somebody would do something like that. But I really became inspired by a few individuals who took these issues on as their own and began knocking on doors, going one house to the next, family by family by family, talking about there really were two sources of the pollution that was coming and that we could solve this problem. We could find a way to change the law that would ban hospital waste dumping offshore. It's within our capabilities as a human species. That's a problem. People don't like it, so let's stop doing it. And that the chemical company could do a better job. And we won on both counts. I shouldn't say we, but the people who cared enough to put their time into these issues showed up enough and were clear enough and compelling enough to make a huge difference. And I saw at a very early age how people really can do amazing things when they work together. So I have been working for Greenpeace for a few years after college, and then with Rainforest Action Network, and now at the Sierra Club, in large part because I believe that we can do amazing things when we work together in communities, regardless of where people live and what country they live. So I've been at the Sierra Club now for almost 7 years, and the thing that is unique about the Sierra Club, for those of you who aren't familiar with the Sierra Club, is that we are people-powered, very volunteer-focused. Sierra Club's been around this year. Next month, we'll be celebrating our 125th anniversary. Mm-hmm. And for the first 40 or 50 years or so, there were no staff. It was all volunteers. And then even for the next couple decades, there was only 1 or 2 staff. So for more than half of our organization's history, all of the work that was done by the Sierra Club was done by volunteers, students, parents, grandparents, people multi-generational who wanted to work together to do great things for their country and for their community. We helped to create and had a voice and a role in the creation of almost every national park in this country over the last 125 years, almost every state park, almost every county park. And Sierra Club members had a role in helping to enact some of the bedrock pieces of environmental legislation that we now have depended on for a long time, that are now under threat by the current president. And none of that was done only by the Sierra Club. It was almost always done as part of a large coalition. But the Sierra Club was almost always engaged in this. And to this day, we do now have several hundred staff members, but we have tens of thousands of volunteers who put real serious time into the work that the Sierra Club does. And we're basically an open-sourced organization. So if you're not a part of the Sierra Club, if you really care about the environment, if you care about clean water or clean air or clean energy or land protection or wildlife protection, and you sometimes wonder, well, what could I do by myself? You can come in and occupy the Sierra Club and make it yours. You can run local work in your local town, in your local community, with a bunch of like-minded people and advocate for the work that we're doing with the Sierra Club brand, with 3 million people now standing behind you. And so that's who we are. That's what we do. One of the first things that I encountered when I came to the Sierra Club was our need as an organization and as a movement to confront the problems of natural gas. By the time I came to the Sierra Club had been doing a lot of work to stop the construction of new coal-fired power plants. And this work was wildly successful. There were almost a little bit more than 200 proposed coal plants that were scheduled to be built, that were being advocated for by George W. Bush and Dick Cheney and others, and coal executives and utility executives across the country. The Sierra Club, Earth Justice, Environmental Integrity Project, and literally hundreds of small grassroots groups, what were called fence line community groups across the country, defeated more than 190 of them from ever being built. But what we realized was that the danger was that we were going to be replacing coal with natural gas, fracked natural gas. That the more we looked into it, the more information came from scientists and academics across the country, we realized that the difference between coal and gas was closing at best, negligible in some cases, and caused significant damage to both air and water quality in addition to our climate. And so we realized that as an organization, as one of our country's iconic environmental organizations, we had to put our heart and soul into getting off of coal and gas and nuclear power all at once. And then as we began to do this work, I began to hear a little bit from some Sierra Club volunteers who had some concerns about large solar plants in the desert, and other Sierra Club folks who had some concerns about large wind facilities. And so we realized that we needed to orient our organization to make sure that we had a very clear and very compelling set of solutions for every problem that we identified. Much of the environmental movement really cut its teeth for decades at stopping bad projects, mining projects near watersheds, logging projects in our national forests, oil projects in sensitive areas and wetlands with human rights abuses associated with them, pipelines, power plants. If you wanted something stopped, call up your favorite tree hugger and we would be pretty good at slowing that project down or stopping it altogether. But if you wanted something created, if you wanted a movement that was as much propositional as oppositional, we hadn't really matured to meet that challenge yet. And if you wanted a movement that was as creative and as tenacious and as thoughtful and as visionary at outlining the world that we wanted to see in terms of energy production and consumption in this country, we needed to do a lot more work. So over the last few years at the Sierra Club, along with a coalition of groups, we have begun to greatly expand our work on clean energy. And we've introduced this Ready for 100 campaign. And the emotional rationale for that is what I started the conversation with, not about the Dartmouth Blend, but about the need for solutions and the need for a practical, optimistic plan to address climate change that was commensurate with the scale of the challenge, that is visionary and also pragmatically and technologically sound. So we are at a fascinating point, I believe, in our country's energy development and in our country's, we're at an inflection point in fighting climate change. Because if you look at what's happening right now in terms of climate and energy, there are two powerful things that are happening that are directly opposed to each other. On the one hand, you have our current president and his enablers in Congress and governor houses and way too many states and in state legislatures who doesn't believe that climate change exists in most of his tweets, and who is taking aggressive, historically aggressive actions to undermine the progress that we've made, not just in the last 8 years, but in the last 30 years. Whether it comes from attacking the progress on minimizing pollutants, whether it's mercury, soot, smog, coal ash, haze, particulate matter, or whether it's undermining the agencies that are designed to put these safeguards into place, or whether it's designed to restrict the funding for these agencies, or whether it's designed to take away the enforcement capability of each of these agencies. I don't have to tell you, because we all read the same articles or see the same stories every night, that there is a thoughtful, concerted, aggressive, well-choreographed campaign going on right now to challenge all of the progress that we've made. And that is a very real and credible and present threat. And it's coming at a time when, even if Hillary was elected, even if we had Chuck Schumer running the Senate or Nancy Pelosi running the House, where we didn't have much wiggle room, we didn't have much margin for error. We're already seeing the warming levels at the poles that exceeded our worst projections just 5 years ago. We're seeing drying areas of the rainforest. We're seeing species migrating more quickly than we thought to both higher altitudes and higher latitudes. We're seeing tens of millions of people facing severe water shortages, hundreds of millions of people facing the danger of extreme weather events on an annual basis. We're seeing billions of dollars of economic damages happening because of these extreme weather events. This is happening already with about a little bit more than 1 degree Fahrenheit of warming. We already know that that level of warming will at least double, if not triple, in the coming years. So the threat was real on November 8th, and it got a lot worse on November 9th. We all know that. What many of us also know is that the opportunity that we have to embrace solutions has never been more accessible and never been more attractive. You heard just a little while ago, here in Hanover, switching over light bulbs was saving $75,000 a year, and those savings can be plowed into deeper and further investments in clean energy and efficiency or in renewables. That's not an isolated incident here just in Hanover or in New Hampshire in the Northeast. This is happening in city after city, in town after town, and company after company across the country and around the world. And it's happening at a pace that really nobody expected. Energy experts didn't forecast this. Environmental groups didn't forecast this. So we have two areas where the actual what's happening on the ground is exceeding forecasts. One is awful, and the other one is amazing, and it's historic. And so our challenge, of course, is to continue to fight every day in the courts, in the streets, in the marketplace, in Congress, in the state houses, almost everything that's coming at us from this administration, this Congress, and state governments across the country, particularly here in New Hampshire. But we're better than that. As a movement, we are much better than simply resisting the worst ideas coming from our current president and his allies. We have to have a counterbalancing force that is even more powerful, where not only can we make progress in very dark times, but we can present a vision that is a whole lot more compelling than that of our opponents. And think about the progress that we've actually made. In just the last few years, as I said before, we've been able successfully to stop the construction of 190 of a little bit more than 200 proposed coal plants all across the U.S. Since that work stopped, there's 1 or 2 new coal plants that are still in the dreams of a few coal executives in this country, but we've pretty much stopped new coal in this country. We have now begun to focus on existing coal plants in the United States, and from 2010 until today, we've secured the retirement of 252 of them. There are 530 in the whole country. We've secured the retirement of almost half of them in just the last 7 years. Think about that. few years ago, when I would cite this progress on new coal, and I would say, and we've stopped 70, or we've secured the retirement of 70 coal plants, or 120, or 140, as that number grew, many people would then follow up in the question and answer portion of the night, and they would say, yeah, what about China? Because they're building a lot. Or they'd say, well, what about India? Because they're building a lot. Well, over the last couple of years, China has closed more coal plants than they've opened. China has already hit their peak coal, and they're beginning to reduce their consumption of coal at the same time that we're drastically reducing our consumption of coal. India has put a freeze on new coal development for the next 10 years, which practically speaking will be a freeze on new coal development in perpetuity. And in China and India combined, that freeze was immediate. There are more than 100 coal plants right now that are half built, that were abandoned like that. And you know why? It's actually not primarily, at least, because of climate change. It's not primarily because coal contributes to some of the leading causes of death in the United States and around the world, though it does. It's because they can't compete economically. In most states in the country, and an increasing number of countries around the world, coal is more expensive than solar. Coal is more expensive than wind. Coal is more expensive than renewable energy and energy storage. So that's why you have these hulking, half-built, rusting steel structures, more than 100 of them in just those two countries alone, because it shows that the world is turning. The United States is turning, other countries are turning. That work is far from over. There are still plants in Indonesia, in Turkey, new plants that are being proposed, making the problem worse, that our global community needs to be successful and effective at fighting. But what I'm highlighting for you is that we have made remarkable progress in the last few years. And right now in the United States, the progress that we're making is incredible, where new solar and new wind is coming in cheaper than coal, cheaper than gas, cheaper than nuclear power. Warren Buffett, who's not, often to be considered a radical commie pinko socialist tree hugger, he owns utilities. One of his subsidiaries, Mid-American in Iowa, has made enough investments in wind energy that by the end of 2018, they'll be at 85% of their power coming from wind. One of the largest utilities in the Midwest. The whole state of Iowa will be at more than 50% in a couple years. The whole state of Kansas will be at more than 50% in the next couple years. South Dakota will be at more than 50% in the next couple years. California, pretty big state, will be at 50% within the next decade. Minnesota, Colorado, Texas, all of these states are making big, profound investments in clean energy, and all of them, most likely within the next decade, will be getting more of their power coming from clean energy than fossil fuels. The final thing I want to say, second most final thing I want to say, is that all of this is irreversible, right? My predecessor's predecessor, the first executive director of the Sierra Club was David Brower. And he was famous. He was talking about the protection of desert areas in Utah from dams that were being proposed and being built. And he was talking about the struggle of environmentalists and the challenge that we face. And he said famously that when it comes to protecting the earth, there are no permanent victories. There's only permanent defeats. Which, trust me, is a depressing notion if this is what you do. And I think that is often true when we're talking about protecting a particular place. But I don't think it's true when it comes to the energy transformation that we're undergoing right now. Think about it. When you all vote on May 9th, and when Hanover becomes 100% powered by clean, renewable energy, raise your hand if you think in 10 years somebody will say, hey, let's go back to fracking. That was awesome. How many people, since clean energy is cheaper and it creates more jobs, and a broader, more shared prosperity, how many people are going to say, let's go back to blowing up mountains to get small amounts of coal? Let's kick native people off their lands to drill for oil. Let's pollute our water. Let's create a country where, right now, more than half of Americans live in places where it's unhealthy to breathe, which is the case right now because of pollution from fossil fuels. That's crazy. We're not going to go back. So I'm excited about this Ready for 100 work that the Sierra Club and many others are doing because it's positive. I look at it as something that, not that we've got to do, but something that we get to do. Not an obligation, but an opportunity. Because we're going to be making changes that are enduring. I'll be able to go for a bike ride with my kids, or I'll look at a map, talk about a road trip where we want to go on, and I'll say, yeah, that town has committed to go to 100% clean energy. That state gets more than half their power from clean energy. Massive parts of our country moving away from fuels that pollute our air, pollute our water, pollute our climate, pollute our democracy, all at the same time. We don't have to be a movement that says no to things. We can be a movement that says yes to a lot more. And so, as you all know, none of this is an armchair exercise. We have to earn it. We have to show up. We have to work for it. It gets hard at times. We have to talk to our neighbors, particularly ones that we might not agree with. We have to refrain from insulting them when they tell us who they voted for. We have to listen. We have to build a movement in every town and every state where the people who have concerns and objections are a part of the work that we want to do, where the people who work or even who invest in coal and oil and gas have a seat at the table. Not about whether we should face climate change, certainly not about whether climate change exists, but how we make this transition. How do we make sure that it works for people who work in the coal mining industry, for people who work on an oil rig, for people who lay pipelines that might transmit and distribute gas or oil? How do we make sure that as we make this transition, it'll work for people, that the prosperity will be widely shared, that the concerns and fears that people have about their jobs or their culture or their town's revenue base that might currently come from fossil fuels, how do we solve their needs? So that's the work that we all have to do together. I hope those of you who are residents of Hanover certainly show up on May 9th. Those of you who aren't, I hope that you also show up on May 9th. I hope that this becomes a larger movement, both for Hanover and Dartmouth and as many of the surrounding towns as we can within the next year. The goal here is to get as much clean energy installed as quickly as possible, to take off fossil fuels in a way that is just as quickly as possible, and to say that we can actually solve this problem. And when we do, it'll be awesome. So thank you all for coming tonight.
So thank you, Michael. Both of you, very inspiring and really wonderful. So we can take questions for about a half hour.
Unless they're difficult questions.
Unless they're different, we can you always refuse, I guess. So, John.
First question, great. Sir, do you want to introduce? I won't.
Yeah, but the group, they need it for CATV, John. Yep.
Michael, my question is about timing of Ready for 100.
Sure.
But before that, I was sitting in the front row, so when we were all raising our hands, I raised my hand every time. Did everyone do that? The last question about whether we were encouraged by what we saw. Was I alone or lonely with that? I was, okay. This is yesterday's Valley Snooze, and above the fold, carbon tax pitched in Vermont. we had a legislator there from Bradford who pitched a carbon tax in place of the state sales tax. That was encouraging. I couldn't believe that I had seen that. And now we hear all these things about plants being closed in China and rusting that Michael's just told us about. And I'm encouraged. Can I have a show of hands of who's encouraged now by what they've just heard? It's really encouraging. The other thing that's encouraging to me, I see 3 young people here, and most of what I see at meetings like this is gray hairs like me. I'm more or less a gray hair. So now for my question. Thank you for being encouraged. For my question, Ready for 100, having renewable and recyclable energy by 2050 does not compute for me. It doesn't compute for most of the people here because we will not be around by 2050. I've put 32 panels on my house. I have a plug-in car. I have a Prius that's not plug-in, but when I get through fighting with my wife about it, we're going to have a plug-in Prius too. And I more than my wife, but we are determined to do Ready for 100 by 2020 because 2050 just ain't in the cards, folks.
You go, John.
Okay.
And we've got a jump on it. We've made a lot of electricity so far. We've got to catch up with heating in the winter. We're using propane for that now. But we're putting in 2 air-to-air heat pumps. We've got a 9,000 and an 18,000 coming in because we have too many electric credits right now. So the question is, can we do it by 2020? Do we really need more technology and all to accomplish this? Are we being pie in the sky about this?
So for me, yeah, go for it. Look, there are parts of this energy transition that are easier than others. And so how I or anybody would answer that question, honestly, depends on what we're talking about. If it's your family in your own home, why would it take you to 2020? Don't you care? Can't you do it by 2019? I'm joking a little bit. Yeah, so I think we are trying to find a way to create a lot of urgency and optimism to meet the challenges that are in front of us. And whether you are a city or a company or a family or a campus, the process of going all the way to 100% clean energy is dependent on the availability of technology and the availability of capital. Technology is largely there, mostly there, and it depends on what sector of the economy you're talking about. So for example, 25 cities so far have made a commitment to go to 100% clean energy. Many of them have set earlier targets, some for 2020, some for 2025, others for 2030, to get all of the electricity that they provide from 100% clean renewable energy. And then they have longer targets for transportation or for buildings, heating and cooling buildings, and other different areas, depending on their current fuel mix and depending on the availability of technology in their area. But if you look across the economy, yeah, we can make dramatic progress more quickly than a 2050 timetable. We'll need to make more progress than a 2050 timetable. It's a question of building the political will and securing the money available to do that, to make that transition, to make those investments. Sure, thanks for the question.
And really quickly, a representative from Senator Hassan's office is here to read a letter.
Hi, my name is Ben Belanger. I am here on behalf of appreciate that. I'm here on behalf of our U.S. Senator Maggie Hassan, and she regrets that she's not be able to join us tonight, but I do have a letter that I'd like to read on her behalf. So Here we go. Dear friends, I regret that I cannot be there with you in person this evening, but I would like to recognize the important work you do to foster a sustainable energy future for the town. It is heartening to know that Lebanon Energy Advisory Committee has endorsed renewable energy initiatives that will contribute to a cleaner environment in the region. The development of new, clean energy is critical to diversifying our energy supply, reducing energy costs for families and businesses, and protecting our natural resources. The renewable energy industry has also created good-paying jobs and generated economic growth in areas where renewables have been embraced, and I will continue to support clean energy development in New Hampshire and across our country. While there is still much work to be done to move away from fossil fuels and expand the use of renewable energy, it is encouraging to see New Hampshire make progress at the local level, evidenced by the steps the LEAC has taken for the region. The committee should serve as a model for other municipalities of what can be achieved by organized citizens in towns and cities across the country. Thank you for the work that you all do to promote renewable energy, improving the quality of life for your neighbors in the Granite State. With every good wish, Margaret Wood Hassan, United States Senator.
Is it on?
Thank you. I'm really grateful to be here and that all of us are here. And when I think about David Brower, I think of the John McPhee, the three-part New Yorker piece that became the dam builder and the arch druid. Mm-hmm. And at one point, John McPhee asks him, well, what's the solution? How do you replace all these hydroelectric dams? And Brower says, Japanese flashlight batteries. What? It turns out, he says, Japanese flashlight batteries. And it turns out batteries are going to be probably a big piece of these solutions. And I think that you made a comment about our job now is just everywhere we can to put up solar panels or get as much renewable in place. And aside from today's wonderful headline in the Valley News about the carbon tax in Vermont, we've had some big setbacks in Vermont in terms of changes in the net metering laws, the fact that a very high percentage of the solarized projects were all, the business model had to do with selling Vermont's renewable energy credits to utilities in Connecticut so they could continue gas plants and even coal plants. So I guess in this moment, I also want to mention that there have been voices all along, Jimmy Carter, but more specifically, someone who in the darkest moments I keep thinking about is Emory Levins, who basically said, this is not going to be an issue because the economics are going to drive it. And I was so encouraged a couple of years ago when the Rockefeller Brothers Fund said no more carbon-based fuels in our portfolio, huge portfolio. And all of these things are part of the force. So I guess my question has to do with how does 100%, ready for 100%, become more than just a slogan and more than just a way of saying, okay, we're going to put in this big project. And when do we start really evaluating one of Emory's first things that I heard him say in the 1970s was decentralize. And when there was a headline about 10 days ago in the Valley News that was saying biggest solar project in Vermont's history is going in. Well, that's going in where it's going in because there's a line into the New England grid. And so the electricity that's there, the economics of that project are based on the 30% investment tax credits and also on the sale of renewable energy credits. So in fact, that energy is not Vermont's energy. It's and
Your question, please. What's your question?
Well, that I'm thinking right now that we know we have a regional grid that over 60% of the energy that goes into the grid is lost to transmission losses. So we have to be wise about how we do this, and that in towns, and that's why I'm really encouraged because I see small towns as being a place where we can actually move quite soon to microgrids And that, yeah, we cooperate with Lebanon, we cooperate in the White River watershed and stuff, but we not simply say more, but what is it? And how do we integrate it into local sustainability? So how is Ready for 100% going to be more than just a slogan?
Thank you for your question, because that gets to the whole point of this work. It's not just a slogan, and it's not an attempt simply to get a bunch of cities or a bunch of CEOs or deans of universities to say, we're going to make this commitment, certainly not several decades later. The real work, say in the town of Hanover, will not start, but it will continue on May 10th, right? So let's say the vote takes place, it's successful. Hanover, like a growing number of other towns and cities, says we're going to get to 100% clean energy across our economy. Then you have to figure out how to do it. And the way in which Hanover will do it will be similar to, but different to, the same conversation that's taking place right now in San Diego with the Republican mayor. And it's similar to, but different in a different way from what Madison, Wisconsin is doing. Some pretty conservative politicians in that state. Similar to and different in different ways from what Aberdeen Springs is doing in Louisiana. And our goal really is to create hundreds of those conversations, to think through at a local grassroots level in rooms just like this, how do we do it? How do we make sure that we're doing exactly what you said, which is putting conservation and efficiency and decentralized energy as the strong preference? How do we make sure that the jobs in clean energy are good jobs, family-sustaining jobs? How do we make sure that the savings are widely held and not necessarily going to a few? How do we meet all of these challenges from a technological, economic, and social perspective? And the Sierra Club is just one of many organizations who are doing this work, but we're an important part because we have local groups and we have volunteers in all of these towns. And our goal is to stay involved in the conversation, not just to secure the commitment and say, go get them, Julia, we'll talk to you in a few years, but then to say, all right, let's talk about how we make this commitment and to turn it to reality.
So before we have the next question, can I ask you to be brief with your question? We don't have that much time, so please think clearly about a brief question. Thank you.
Hanover is a very wealthy town.
Is it on?
Yep.
Hanover is a very wealthy town, and so we're privileged to be able to do this. If you go 10 miles to a certain way or a different way, that isn't the case. So what kind of responsibility do we as a town have to towns that are not so lucky as we are?
That's a good question. Good.
I wish you'd get a group together of all the select boards in the different towns and try to help them answer their questions. They're really hard to talk to.
No, this is where you get the money. You know, give to the other communities. We're not all as rich as Hanover is.
So maybe, Julia, maybe you could
Yeah.
take on this question.
So, as you heard me say earlier, I do believe that it takes the decision of the community to make some investment of local taxpayer dollars in energy efficiency improvements. And that's not something that Hanover can do for Lyme or that Lyme can do for Piermont. That's something that Piermont has to do for Piermont. And the way in which I think Hanover and other communities can contribute to this effort is through encouraging us to get together to educate ourselves about what options are available, what grant funds are available, what programs are out there that might benefit smaller communities. But ultimately, it's going to have to be town meeting after town meeting talking about these issues. And that's why local citizen education is really, really important. I don't relish Hanover going to Piermont's town meeting to convince them that they should spend $50,000 a year on energy efficiency improvements. I don't think Orford wants Hanover there telling them what they should do. But I do think that Orford residents, Piermont residents, need to organize locally and begin the conversations locally. Communities like Hanover are often providing technical assistance where we can. And that's part of what we do every day as managers, working with each other on regional efforts. But I don't know that you can let each and every community off the hook in terms of grappling with these issues themselves.
Yeah, if I can ask you a quick question. Hi, my name is Becca White, and I work for
a solar company called SunCommon, but I also serve on the Hartford Select Board, which is the town on the other side of the river in Vermont. And while I really appreciate the last question that was asked, I wanted to ask, in Vermont, we have a 90% renewable by 2050 statewide goal. And the piece that I'm struggling with is how to express the importance of the Ready for 100 campaign and not just stick with the 90% by 2050 goal that we have as a state.
Well, yeah, I mean, if the 90% by 2050, is that for the electric sector? Is that what is 90% cut in all emissions? It's everything. Yeah, I think. Well, look, that's a very specific question, and there's not that much difference between 90 and 100. So I should probably start my answer by stating the obvious. So I wouldn't lead with a comparison of 90 versus 100 and say that 100 has 3 digits and 90 only has 2 or something like that. Personally, I wouldn't find that as compelling. I think that there's an opportunity to bond with other cities, towns, states, campuses on ambitious goals to go to 100%. If communities in Vermont want to be honorary members because they got to a much bolder or a very bold figure a little bit earlier, that's fine. But the real goal here is to figure out how do you get really far really quickly to make dramatic improvement in places where, at a time where we're stalling in other areas.
My name is Lynn Sweat Miller. I live in Hanover. I've been involved in this in various ways in our community throughout the years. I would just like to please encourage you to have more people like Allison Samuel. We all need her youth, her energy, and her capacity to get some stuff done that the rest of us might not be as good at doing as we used to be.
Yeah.
And please, if there's anything you can do to support Allison and people like her in each of these communities for a long, I know the goal would be to work herself out of a job and we all do this ourselves, and I understand that concept.
Yes.
But I think practically speaking, having somebody like her in our midst for at least 5 years is a realistic goal because it takes so long just to get started.
I hear you.
So thank you.
You got it. Message heard and received with positivity.
Somebody can pass the microphone up, so I'll start. First of all, as a state rep looking at the larger landscape, I'd like to say thank you, Hanover, because you are a model across the state, and people talk about you and they look to you, and it's important that you are providing a model. Secondly, we have a moment in time right now where the fossil fuel infrastructure machine is in high gear. They know if they don't get these pipelines, they don't get these transmission projects done in the next 3 to 5 years, they will never get them done because it will be so completely clear that they are not the economically efficient way to go. There's still the impression, particularly at the State House, that they are economically efficient and that they are necessary for the reliability of the grid. We know it's not true. But we need to get organized and be out there proactively, particularly with this Lebanon, Hanover, Liberty Gas infrastructure project. We need to stop putting our money into fossil fuel infrastructure, and we need to be investing in clean energy.
Yeah, just a very quick question. I was very impressed by the water fountain downstairs, which keeps track of the number of plastic water bottles that have been avoided by its use. And so that led me to wonder, and you touched on some of this in your talk, Julia, but I want to press the need to summarize this stuff, keep it in front of people's faces all the time. How many kilowatt hours avoided? How many, how many dollars saved? You mentioned for one project, cumulative. Put that stuff together. I hope you're doing that. If it's not obvious, my background is in communications, and so I would earnestly recommend that.
Thank you.
Joanna?
Hello, I'm Joanna Scharf. I live in Cornish, New Hampshire, which is one of the small surrounding towns who our energy committee is trying to get our town to commit to 100% renewable. And my question is, and thank you both for being here and for talking about this. Our town is very different from Hanover, and what is my question? Do you have any wisdom, Michael especially, about how to talk to a town that is very resistant to this type of idea?
I have a little bit of experience at that. I guess what I would say is not necessarily specific to Cornish or any one community, but it's how to communicate in a time when we're more likely to disagree on anything than in the past. And so I think the best way to communicate often is to stop talking and listen a little bit more. So the advantage of the climate change energy issue is that it touches on a lot of things. And some people are really motivated to work on climate change because they care about polar bears or they care about endangered species and the threat of climate change to wildlife. Other people are terrified about their kids, what kind of world their kids will grow up into. Some people don't believe that climate change exists, that it's real, like my uncle. But they care about self-reliance, energy self-reliance. And they don't want to have to be paying a utility or a gas company or an oil company to get their own power when they can take care of it themselves, which is why he went solar. Some people care more about jobs. Some people care a lot they're excited by technology and the idea that we can power our cars with electricity, or our bikes with electricity, or we can have meters to track how much energy we consume and control that by our phone. So I think it's really important to understand who you're talking to, listen, find out what they care most about, and then show how what we're offering, our solution, how it speaks to their own values and how it helps to address the things that they care most about.
I'm thinking of some of our, I'm picturing some of the region select board members as I answer this, because I watch some of those shows on CATV to the extent they're broadcast, and I've attended my share of select board meetings in other communities over the years, and some folks may not buy climate change as real, but they sure can appreciate a good payback analysis. And so, for example, we had one select board member, earlier generation of select boards, who was perhaps less enamored with our energy efficiency investments than others. And when it came to replacing all of the fixtures in our parking garage with LED fixtures, that was an expensive project. But when he saw the payback was 3 years, it's a no-brainer from his perspective. And so we satisfied his concerns. We also got what we wanted, which is a much more energy efficient parking garage in the process. So for some of our practical Yankees amongst our boards, who I think will respond to a good payback analysis. And a lot of these projects have very compelling payback analyses. So the key is to approach it from that perspective. Nothing wrong with sharing that you're there from an energy efficiency standpoint, but oh, by the way, you can prove that this project will pay for itself in some appropriate period of time as a reason to make the investment.
So I think we have maybe time for one more question.
Yes. Hi, I'm Marta Ceroni, and my question is about the role of utility companies and whether there is a hope that the Ready for 100 campaign can actually shift, if at scale, some of the behaviors and the rules within utility companies, especially here in New Hampshire where we have deregulation and so they cannot generate.
Yeah.
Go ahead, yeah.
Sure. There most definitely is hope that we can bring utilities to be more emphatically in agreement with the goal of this work. And I think that there's a great opportunity to do that, in part because depending on how a particular utility is regulated, there are enormous opportunities for utilities to make investments and earn a return for their shareholders by going bigger in clean energy. But particularly when you think about electrifying more of our fleet, that's a market share that utilities don't currently have. So every garbage truck, mail truck, school bus, and vehicle that plugs into a grid, that is a customer that utilities don't have. That's a customer right now of Chevron and Shell and Exxon and others that could be a customer of that utility as we and when we make a transition, and particularly in the transportation sector, towards clean energy. Right now, I mean, to be clear, that it is a challenge with many utilities across the country, in that many of them see the growth of solar, particularly decentralized distributed solar, as a threat to their business. Every home that puts solar panels on their rooftop is one less customer, and that's a genuine challenge for many of these utilities to engage in. And I think it's a challenge for regulators to figure out how can we, as a community and as a country, really make this transition in ways that don't punish particular investors necessarily. So I think on the electric side, there's work to be done. And in the transportation side, there's a tremendous carrot that's dangling in front of the industry if they were to go for it.
So in closing, I want to thank all of you for coming tonight and for all of the work that you're doing throughout the Upper Valley in this area of moving towards renewables. I invite all of you to attend the Hanover Town Meeting on May 9th, in particular those of you who are citizens of Hanover and can vote, but also the presence of those of you from communities throughout the Upper Valley. It's heartening for all of us to see you, and your being there supports us, and we hope to support you when it's your turn next spring. So thank you for coming. And obviously, I want to thank our two speakers, both for their inspiring comments this evening, but also for the hard work and leadership that you do throughout the year. So thank you both very, very much.